Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine, where this week we're chatting to Robert Whitlow. Robert has published more than 20 novels, mostly legal thrillers, which makes sense as he works as a part-time lawyer. We talk about why he needs a few goes round, a couple of drafts to properly figure out his main characters. Also, why he's really quite chilled about how he gets the words down. And you can hear why the secret to writing, he thinks, is figuring out how to do it best and simply being consistent with it.
I call it your writing biorhythm. How much time in a day can you dedicate to the creative process and really perform it at your highest level of capability? Some folks can sit in there for hours, 10 hours, 8 hours, and just, make it happen. I learned pretty early on that I am pretty good for maybe 2 hours, 2.5, and then I'm kind of done. I can still work after that, but it seems like it has a tendency to get a little flatter.
It's all on the way in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan Simpson, this is Writer's Routine. If you've never listened before, thank you for being there. It's the podcast where we take a look inside an author's working day. If you're not following us and subscribed to our Substack channel yet, we're talking about seasonal novels. Where I am in the UK, well, I actually spoke too soon because it's been raining all week, but like spring instantly sprung. This glorious 10 days of glorious sunshine appeared from nowhere, and it just really wanted me to consume, to wolf through as many like springish novels as I could, if that makes sense. And that led us to thinking about different seasonal novels. So as soon as it turns to autumn, is there something that you like to read while it's pretty dank and dark, drizzly outside? As it gets to Christmas time, is there something you always turn back to, that ideally you're reading in front of a crackling fire? That's what I'm talking about, and I'd love to hear your seasonal novels. You can subscribe and let me know. It's completely free on our Substack channel. Find the link wherever you're listening. Now, this week, we're chatting to Robert Whitlow, who has published over 20 novels. And in my mind, Robert's books are completely associated with staying in B&Bs. It might sound ridiculous, but do you know what I mean when you're on holiday and there's a clubhouse or maybe in reception at the B&B, whatever it is, there's a bookshelf with the most threadbare, thumbed-through novels in history. And you'll always get, normally a David Baldacci, a Dean Koontz novel. If you're in the UK, there's probably a Jilly Cooper. And also, that's where I see Robert Whitlow novels. They're really well regarded like that. There's something that you can pick up that you just instantly get to terms with, and they'll give you a gripping yarn. And I think that's really high praise for fiction. 4 of his novels have been adapted into successful movies, and many of them have a theme of faith running through them. For that, he's been awarded the prestigious Christy Award for contemporary fiction. We discuss why that's important to him, how forced he needs to make it, hopefully not that forced at all, how he makes it organic, and whether he's bothered if reading a novel really affects someone's opinion on religion at all. Now, his newest book is called Guilty Until Innocent. A simple and effective premise: when an old case is reopened, 2 lawyers work to prove someone's innocence, even though it's a tough sell and the odds are stacked against them. We talk about how, being a lawyer, he makes thrillers set in a legal world accessible. Is it ever hard to kind of keep all your knowledge at bay there? Also, you can hear how he makes the protagonist unique and authentic in each book when they're all set in similar worlds. We chat through why he loves editing and why he doesn't really mind how many words he gets down as long as they're good ones. It's all on the way. Let's jump into it with Robert Whitlow, and we start, as we always do, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
I have a dedicated room in our home. We live in a older home. Of course, it may not be old by English standards, but it's 90 years old. It's a kind of a federal architecture brick home, just a gorgeous spot. And we have an upstairs bedroom that's no longer in use. It used to be actually a quilt closet. They used to hang quilts on the wall of the room, and now it's the spot where I'm set up to write. And if I open the windows, I have the view of a pretty busy street, one of the main thoroughfares of Charlotte, North Carolina, that goes downtown, and that's where it happens.
So you're in the office, what was once a quilt closet. We can see out your window. What is there around you that is inspiring? Whenever I speak to American authors in particular, I will be honest, it's always full of stuff. It's full of bric-a-brac. It's full of totems, mementos of places you've been, family pictures. There's always so much. Are you the same?
There are. It's cluttered. It's cluttered, Dad. We have 4 children. 11 grandchildren, so there's plenty of possibilities for photos, but most of the ones actually in that room are my 2 sons, and some of the things that we did during their growing up time and then as adults. And I have those kind of displayed about, and I have a small built-in bookcase that's directly across from where I write, and that is dedicated to books on writing primarily. One of the things you try to do is continually improve your skill. And so I have, a number of books that I have available there. Some I've read more than once, and things I can refer to. It is we do, even though it's in the city, we do have some really nice greenery out the front windows. I'm on the second level of the home, so I have a bit of an overview of the greenery out front and then the road beyond that. So that's kind of the surroundings.
So with the writing books that you've got nearby, I mean, you've published over 20 novels now. You've sold very well. How often is it that you're reading something that is actively changing the way that you're writing? Or is it almost a case of just having to, it's always good to be reminded of the rules?
It's the latter, Dan. It's just being reminded of things that I want to keep at the forefront. An example would be, archetypal structure for the characters. I like to be reminded of that. I really have found that dynamic helps craft characters that have nuance as you think about the strengths and weaknesses of the archetypes. I do have some grammar books there. I like to know that when I break the rules, it's on purpose, not out of ignorance. And so I will refer to those. I was also quite heavily influenced by, mythic structure, the writer's journey, the hero with 10,000 faces. Of course, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with those. And while I don't necessarily go back to that regularly, I do try to think about those things regularly. And just having those books there is just a reminder.
You've got those books. We've got a few photos around us, glorious view out the back. What is there that's a bit more practical and pertains to what you're writing? If I were to drop myself into the old quilt closet midway through a draft, would I see, post-it notes or plot points all around, wild mind maps and brainstorms that reminds you of your plot?
Okay, what I do, I am a seat of the pants writer. I do not operate off a detailed outline. However, I do have a pretty clear, idea about the beginning and the end. And then the large middle is just a voyage of discovery that I enter into and, seek to follow in a way that entertains myself, and then will hopefully entertain the readers as well. So I'll have a legal pad or something like that. I'm a lawyer, so I have those hanging around, and I will jot down notes to myself, as ideas occur or as I realize, oh, this is going to need to be changed in edit. So I will have a legal pad or various sheets of paper just kind of haphazardly clumped together in an area where I know where they are, that in which I have notes and things that I want to make sure I address. I'm right now in the first major edit of a new novel, so I'm referring to those notes as I go through the manuscript and make changes. I absolutely love the editing process. It's just a fantastic opportunity to make something better, and that's kind of how I go about it.
Do you love the initial drafting process quite as much, or is it just a case of kind of getting the words out, like hoping, praying that you'll be able to edit it well later?
I think it is a bit more of a labor with the initial draft. However, I want to enjoy the journey, and so I really pretty much do, and don't have a whole lot of problems with writer's block. One of the things I often do is I will stop writing where I still have a bit of an idea of what's going to happen next, so I've got a tag to pick up with the next time I turn on the computer. But it is very satisfying for me to have a work in progress at least complete in the first draft stage, so that then I can refine it, make it better, smooth it out. One of my main goals in all of that is to become invisible, so that the reader is drawn into the life of the characters and the plot, and so they're experiencing that without feeling that I'm intruding into their experience.
I don't know but the balance of your work is in terms of lawyering and writing. I mean, we'll get to we'll touch on that in just a second. But through your, as I say, 20 plus novels now, has there been like a moment where your working space has reflected the change in the balance of those two careers? I mean, when, would your working space, 20 years ago have been all about being a lawyer, and then gradually the writing has crept more in, and now that's the focus of where you work?
The big change in that is when I first started, I did not have a dedicated spot. We have the home is large. It was a former bed and breakfast, but at that point we still had all of our children at home, and I started out just grabbing a spot on the sofa in the living room and sitting there and writing from that location. Then the room I'm using now was actually the bedroom for our older son. So once he moved out and went on with his life, that's when I took over that space and created a dedicated spot, which is very helpful to have, because when I go in there, I'm putting aside hopefully everything else that's going on in my life, whether it's professionally or personally, so I can be focused on the writing. I am, one thing that all writers have to learn is what I call it your writing biorhythm, and that's what I mean by that is how much time in a day can you dedicate to the creative process and really perform it at your highest level of capability. And some folks can sit in there for hours, 10 hours, 8 hours, and just, make it happen. I learned pretty early on that I am pretty good for maybe 2 hours, 2.5, and then I'm kind of done. I can still work after that, but it seems like it has a tendency to get a little flatter. So I recognize that dynamic during the creative process. Now, during the editing process, I can spend more time, but still the degree of concentration that's required is significant for me, and so I will take frequent breaks. But that's a huge thing to figure out, and then you can relax and, well, that's the way I am, and not try to be somebody that can churn out 7,000 or 8,000 words a day.
We'll come to more of the routine in just a second. I'd like to touch on what else you have learned, because I'm aware that publishing one book is a battle, but you're only halfway there. It takes you a long time of doing this before you really realise who it is you are as a writer and what your voice is. What do you remember of kind of the moment so many novels ago when you started to figure out, oh, okay, I've kind of got a handle on this now. I understand who I am as a writer, how I work best, and the type of novels that I write best?
That really happened in the midst of the first book. Of course, at that point, I did not have a contract, no deadline. It took about two and a half years to write that novel. I was just writing it for my wife. I actually had no real ambition about being a published author. I just had an idea, and I wrote it for my wife, who's a huge reader, and it was great for marital harmony to have a book that you write for your spouse and then dedicate it to her. It was amazing. But during that process, I read a book called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by two authors, Brown and King. And, as a lawyer, Dan, a lot of times you have to pretend to be something of a pseudo expert in different areas when you're involved in a case, whether it's some aspect of medicine, if you're going to be talking to a doctor, or something to do with business, if you're involved in business litigation. And so what I did is I said, okay, I'm just going to try to pretend and learn how to be a writer. And that particular book was extremely helpful for me. And I applied the concepts in it to the work in progress in the first novel. And in that, I started getting a sense of what it means to create a novel. Because before that, I would look at a novel and say, how does that happen? But that book gave me some tools that I was able to apply to what I was doing. And it was in the midst of that I started realizing, okay, I see how this works. The other advantage that I think I had was I have been taken thousands of depositions and been in thousands of court hearings. And that really gives you an ear for dialogue. And so writing dialogue came fairly easily to me, which was a huge help, because I understand from other writers how that can be a struggle. I actually had a little bit more trouble with the narrative parts of writing than I did in the dialogue. So it was all in that first novel. I realized, hey, I can do this, and it can turn out fine. And it's kind of like unstopping a well. After the first novel, I pretty much started a second one pretty soon thereafter, and thankfully that was in process when I had the meeting with the publisher, and they said, yeah, we want to sign a contract with you. Do you have something else? And I said, yeah, because obviously they don't want to just do a one-off. They want to have something they can build.
You mentioned that you struggle more with the narrative sections of your novels. When you realise that, clearly trying to learn, particularly early on, what were you doing to make that easier, to make yourself better at doing that? How were you learning how to improve?
What I did is, of course, I embraced the whole concept of show, not tell. And, that's obviously something when, I'm reviewing something as a favor for somebody that's a new author, new writer, is resisting that urge. And so my narrative sections, I started making them shorter because I wanted to be able to show what was taking place rather than just telling it. And by shortening those narrative sections, I was better able to handle that aspect of the process. And I think it did help me become a better writer at the same time. So making it more bite-sized just is more manageable.
We get quite niche and nerdy in this, Robert. We're very into tech. So can you just run us through like what software you use to write with? And I guess most importantly, what typeface do you prefer? What's your font of choice?
Yes, I use Times New Roman. Usually 14 at 1.5 spacing. I'm 70 years old. I don't look it. I know we're not live video, but I don't look 70, but I am 70, so I've got reading glasses. But I use Microsoft Word. I've tried some of dip my toe in the water for some of the specific writing softwares, like Scrivener is one, and it just never really suited me. I'm just straight up Word doc. I do have a separate file for the characters in every novel, so I will have a list of the characters, their names, something about their physical attributes, a little bit of their backstory in a separate file that helps me keep folks straight. But that's pretty much it. I carry a lot of it around in my head. At times I have, for a number of novels, I would do a summary on a separate document of each chapter. That's a pretty good idea. I probably should do that more, but I haven't done that the last few novels, but I have also done that in the past where I would have a short paragraph summary once I finish a chapter of what took place in that chapter. Typically, my chapters are between 22 and 3,200 words. Chapters have gotten shorter over the years. I think it probably is related to people's attention span between commercial breaks.
Just 1 second there, Robert. I was chatting to another author recently who also writes kind of legally crime thrillers, who was discussing about attention span. How do you know to make them shorter? Are you being told that? Is that coming back in editing feedback that, maybe this is a bit long and you should cut it down and it's progressively got shorter and shorter and shorter? Is that just something that you are picking up yourself?
It's myself. It's something that I just decided would work, and it seems to have worked, and I know other people do it. There was no pressure from the publisher to do that. The other thing I want to make sure I get out there that has been so helpful and hopefully will be of benefit to your listeners is I really had a transformational input from a seminar that I went to that was led by a gentleman named Donald Moss, Maass, I believe. He's a New York editor, agent, and I think he's also an author. And this is something I kind of inherently knew, but he really brought it to the surface in a way that I could cooperate with it intentionally. And that is the necessity for microtension. And that plays into the chapter length. Every scene, I endeavor to have some level of microtension, of some level of conflict, question. It could even be related to humor. You have the overarching tension of the main plot, but to get the readers to not skim and to want to turn the page, I really intentionally work on creating microtension in virtually every scene. It could be something, it can be benign. It can be a small misunderstanding. It can be a interpretation of something that's going on that might be a bit different. But that is, and a lot of times I will end a chapter with a perhaps slightly heightened level of microtension so that the reader would say, I was going to go to bed after that chapter, but I got to stay up and read another one.
How worried do you get then that they can all be organic? Like, if you know in every chapter there needs to be a little tension, there needs to be something just to keep us wondering, to keep us asking questions and to keep us reading. Surely sometimes that can't all be organic. Do you ever worry that those microtensions can feel a bit forced simply because you need them in there?
You have to be very careful with that because, once again, that would defeat the purpose of becoming invisible and cause the reader to say, okay, the author's just messing with me now. So all of those things have to be, they have to be, with credibility. So the characters have to be willing to carry what's taking place, and you've either set that up in the dynamic of who the character is, what their problems, what their issues are. So yes, you'd really have to be careful with that, that it doesn't come across as forced or fake. Whether I succeed or not obviously is up to the reader, but you are 100% right that has to be handled, has to be handled carefully. I work part-time as an attorney now, so I come to the office almost every day in the mornings. I usually wait till after the rush hour traffic's died down, and then I come in, like I'm in my office right now talking to you today. It's 10:26 on a Friday morning. And I will be here probably through lunch. One of my main goals is to have lunch with one of my buddies. I like to socialize like that. And then when I do go home this afternoon, it's not unusual for me to have a 1 to 1.5 hour writing session this afternoon, in the afternoons, before supper. And then after supper, I will often have another session for an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's a good day. My goal is to try to write 1,000 words a day. And I want them to be good words. If there's only 500 words, but they're good ones, then I'm satisfied. If my wife says, hey, we need to go to the store and get something for the house, then I'm relaxed about that. I don't say, I can't write, I can't go with you, I can't help you. I try to keep that all balanced properly for marital harmony and just the correct perspective. So a typical good day, I'll have 2 sessions like that where I have, been able to produce something. On the weekends, if we're not busy on a Saturday, it might be a little bit longer. But sometimes, I might have to skip a weekend if we have something planned. The key to it is diligently continuing and not allowing long gaps of inactivity. I've heard it said that you're only a writer on the days you write. So I am and my wife is great about protecting my privacy time to be able to do it regularly because it's a big project. My novels typically are 110 to 125,000 words. I want to create something that the reader wants to live in for a while. And so, that's doing it regularly, even if it's in smaller increments of time. It works. You
said that you want those words to be good first time round. How much better are you now at kind of spotting whether they are good or not? I know you love editing, but it's a waste of time if you have to constantly delete things.
Yeah, that is painful, but yes, I am much better at that. When I was writing my first novel, I was maybe 12, 14 chapters in. I was taking one of my daughters at the time she was riding horses. I took her to the horse farm and was going to work in the car. I spilled a drink on my laptop and fried it, but I had everything printed out. I mean, this is back in the 90s. And I didn't work on it for a while after that when I didn't have the laptop for a season. And when I picked it up and looked at the pages I'd written, there were like 12, 13 chapters. It was really, really bad, except for one chapter. And that chapter was good. And that was enough, Dan, to just say, okay, this is worth picking up and continuing. So, thankfully, I'm not at that level anymore. But you do have to you can't fall in love with your work too much to not be willing to cut it to make it better, if that makes sense, of course. So, the novel that I'm working on right now, I would not be surprised if I'm right at 120,000 words. I won't be surprised if I have to cut 10 and maybe add 3 in the major editing process, but that's not too much waste, and I'm good with that.
How much does one affect the other? So, you work part-time as an attorney, you're there in the mornings. Do you find yourself holding stuff back because you've got 1,000 words to try and write in the afternoon? The prospect of those words must be a looming spectre at times.
Well, thankfully not so much. I'm sure you've heard this, once you start down this writing road, it has to come from this, intrinsic inner place that if you're not writing, it's like something's not the way it should be in my life. And so, I've had very limited times in the past 25 years. Well, now it's almost, because I started in 96, we're coming up onto 30 years. I've had very limited times when I wasn't writing. So it doesn't loom over me as a burden. It's more like, I can't wait to, I'm looking forward to getting into this and seeing what happens and wanting to, create characters that are interesting enough to me that they can hold my attention, because hopefully that'll be the case then for readers. So thankfully that's not been a big problem. I'm able to, segment my life in a way to be able to do the things that, all aspects of it.
Because you are a pantser of a writer, is there anything that you do to kind of make it easier for you to drop back into after a busy morning being an attorney? Is there anything you do to kind of just help yourself jump straight back into the story when you sit there, when you've got a limited time in the afternoon to play with?
Well, I might play a game of Wordle just to, kind of clear the brain a little bit. It will, I'll look back over just a little bit of what I may have written the previous day. And sometimes I didn't mention this earlier, I mentioned having the tag. Sometimes I will have a line or two of, what might be happening next. And so I'll review that and think, oh, yeah, I remember that now. And that kind of puts me back in the flow.
You seem like quite relaxed about the whole thing. Like you don't mind if you get dragged off to go shopping or maybe your afternoon of writing gets slightly interfered with. That surely can't be the case the whole thing. Like there are deadlines that you need to hit. How often do you find yourself getting a bit stressed and having to work frantically with the whole thing? I've been with the same company, publishing company, my entire career, so they understand my process. And one of the things that they have incorporated to kind of help limit that is I do request and receive extra time in the editing process. So if they didn't give me that, Dan, I would probably be pretty frantic. I would be frustrated because I wouldn't be able to have the time to think through things in editing that, would make the novel better. But thankfully, my publisher knows my how I operate, and so they do grant me the extra time to help avoid that from happening. If they didn't,
it would create the kind of scenario you just described, of kind of frantic, not being able, oh, I know I want to change this. Do I have time to work on that? So, that's not been part of my process, just because of their understanding.
You seem to have the knowledge of the process, at the very least, pretty dead on. More than 20 novels in, does it get any easier? Did you still, halfway through, are you like, oh, I don't think this is ever going to get done?
No, I don't really think that. I hope that doesn't discourage somebody out there that feels that way, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I will say that I'm thinking of one novel in particular that involved a theft of some artwork from Italy at the end of World War II. And I remember, as I got toward the end of that novel, I had so many loose ends, and trying to connect things, I did feel a bit overwhelmed on that particular book. And it did take extra effort to kind of step back and reorient, restructure some things. That was kind of the exception, not the norm, but I have certainly did experience it with that particular novel. And, I think it worked out fine in the end, or at least I haven't gotten feedback that it didn't. But, if you run into that kind of a cul-de-sac, then there's no shame in taking 2 steps back or 5 steps back and saying, okay, some of this is just not working. Let's just start fixing it one brick at a time.
You've said how much you enjoy the editing, and that you're a writer who is always seeking to improve too. Throughout the editing that you've done on books, I wonder, is there something that you pick up on that you always tend to do that needs to be fixed? Is there a part of your writing that you would like to improve on?
Yes, that would be, sometimes my main characters don't have the vibrancy. I'm talking about the main character, probably. A lot of times you'll have 2 main characters in a book, and one of those characters is a little, because a lot of times those characters are kind of an everyman type individual, and a lot of times those characters need something to ramp up who they are and what they're about. I don't have that problem with my supporting cast. You're able to give them, some quirky tendencies or something that makes them vibrant. But it is very common for my editorial feedback to say, you need to do some work with main character X and just increase, the revelation of who they are, what they're dealing with, what their challenges are, what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. That is a common aspect. You asked me about what have I done to fix it? Well, I try to fix it, but I still get the feedback. So I guess I'm still a work in progress.
Why do you think that is? If you know it, and it's your main character, right? So you're spending the most amount of time with them. Why do you think it is that you still don't quite nail maybe all aspects of them first time around?
I think there may be a personal aspect to that, is that my own life is not filled with murder and mayhem. And I influence the main characters deeply. I think it's maybe a bit of self-reflection. If I have wondered about that, and I'll be interested in the book I'm just now finishing if I get that same feedback, because I told one of the main characters in this book, it won't be out until next year, but is in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Where somebody's given a new identity because they testify in a major criminal investigation. And I have noticed that this character, there is so much tension inherent in that aspect of who he is, and the potential for that being no longer being secret, then I think it's going to help it be avoid that problem I just identified. So we'll see.
We're back with more from Robert in just a tick. If you're enjoying the show, there are a few ways that you can help us out and support us if you fancy. Now, you can do that with cold hard cash, really, over on our Patreon page or on Ko-Fi. If you'd like to back us monthly, you can do that on Patreon, patreon.com/writersroutine. On there, you get access to our writing community. There is merch, there is bonus content, there is even a way for your book to sponsor the show. I'm completely aware, it's absolutely fine. Maybe you don't want to have a monthly obligation like that. Well, it's fine. You can do it on our Ko-Fi page. Just a one-off tip comes directly to me, one and done, absolutely fine. ko-fi.com/writersroutine. And I really mean this. I completely get times are tight. Whatever you can give goes an extraordinarily long way. It helps me keep bringing you these chats with the best authors around as often as I can. Also, if you're ever buying a copy of a book, maybe it's one that we've featured on the show, you can find them on our bookshop.org page. Even getting something else on there, if you kind of click through my page and find what you want, some of it will come through to the podcast and myself, and parts go to your local independent bookshop. So it helps the complete writing ecosystem. You can also subscribe to our Substack and give us a follow on X and Insta too. The links are in the episode notes or wherever you're listening. Let's get back to it with Robert Whitlow then, chatting about his new gripping legal drama, Guilty Until Innocent, which at the very least is a brilliant attention-grabbing name, come on. You can hear why he loves writing characters and what he does to make them different when they're all existing in a similar world. Also, we run through how he wrestles those characters back to his idea when they might want to go their own way. And I mentioned the idea of faith. It's important to him that it plays a part, but how organic can that theming really be? Is it forced at all? That's where we jump back into it with Robert.
That is super important. And, the recognition of that and the ability to do that is really fundamental to what I'm about. Part of my, novels are reflections of life in, compressed manner. And, this is an aspect of life for a lot of people. And, readers, whether they have religious interests or not, they're intrigued by, well, this is how somebody like this might navigate this particular aspect or circumstance of life, just like, throwing open the window to what it's like to be a lawyer, because there was an attorney basically in every novel I've written. So, I have a basic belief that, God is real and wants to be involved in the whole scope of life. That's it. And so with that as kind of an overarching framework, then spiritual dynamics take place at various levels within the life of the characters, much of which takes place outside the walls of a church, which I enjoy doing that because, I think it is God wants to interact across the whole scope of life. So one of the things you have to be acutely aware of if you're going to have something like that, or anybody with any kind of a strong belief system, whether they're an environmentalist or, or whatever it might be, you have to develop characters that can carry the weight of who they are in that aspect of their personality and their belief and their conduct. Because, for me, I want to avoid what I would call a crusader novel where, the story is just an excuse to preach a sermon. I want the characters to be able to, display and demonstrate what they think and what they believe in a way that is credible because of that's who they are. And sometimes, obviously, I don't agree with everything my characters say, which is a little bit humorous, Dan, because I will get emails from people criticizing a character's some aspect of maybe their belief system, and I think that might be a legitimate observation. I don't do that a lot. A lot of times, I just let the characters. They do reflect something that I think is possible and within the realm of possibility for them in that context. So it is a fun way to explore that aspect of life and its influence. And I must admit, I've had characters that I have thought to myself, I wish I were more like this person.
Are you bothered at all, Robert, by whether or not your novels affect someone's opinion on faith come the end? Like, is it ideal that someone reads a book and thinks, oh, you know what, I wasn't convinced, but now this might be for me? Or are you bothered if they're like, you know what, it definitely ain't for me? Does that kind of factor into your thinking at all?
It doesn't affect my creative process. I'm interested in it. If I get feedback, I respect what people say. I'm happy if they buy the book, so that's a positive. But yes, I'm not saying, I would definitely say that I desire to influence people in a positive direction. And if that takes place, that's a home run. And I am very glad to receive feedback that has taken place. If somebody says, nope, this is not for me, then, that's, I respect their perspective on it. And, I'm just doing what I do. I don't read a lot of reviews. I'll read professional reviews. I'm talking about things that just appear on the internet or on the purchase sites. Every so often I will glance, and if somebody, may point out something that they thought was a weakness in a story, then I'll definitely take note of that to try to do better. But I do care what people, that people might be influenced in a positive way. I deeply care that would take place, and I rejoice when it does. But I'm also very aware of the need to handle this sort of thing in a way I described, where I'm not preaching a sermon but telling a story.
The new novel, Robert, is Guilty Until Innocent. Just to describe what you remember about the first moment that the idea for this story came into your head, what was the seed that presented itself?
Yeah, the title gives it away a bit because it's about a man who has been wrongfully accused and has spent over 25 years in prison. So that's an inherently dramatic circumstance. And in the story, the man actually, after he heard the evidence, he actually believes he did commit the crime. So the reader has to go along the journey of that whole process. But it really started with that. And so we follow that character, and and one of the things that I enjoyed about it was he's actually built a legitimate, meaningful existence within prison. He's not just there, gnawing at the bars. He has created something with his influence that is admirable. And so I really enjoyed portraying that aspect of who he is, who he has become. And the other main character is a young lawyer who has failed at 2 firms and has now been hired by a distant relative, and who's the kind of lawyer that takes just about anything that walks through the door. And he is retained to try to see if he can get this gentleman out of prison after all these years have passed. So this is, he's a young man who has, not been successful, but yet he's and then he's thrust upon this impossible situation. And then in the midst of that, a bunch of stuff happens.
You've said that you're not a plotter at all. You have the beginning, you have the end. So you have that initial what if of an idea. Very simply, what happens next? How are you generating a plot to start your novel from that idea of, okay, what happens if you're automatically guilty unless you're proven innocent?
Yeah. Well, what you do at that point is then it's all about building the characters. And, creating who they are, what they're about, what their challenges are, what is their level of involvement in the main plot issue. So then, and I absolutely I said I loved editing. I also love characters, getting to know the characters. And, on occasion they will have their inspiration from people I know, but they always, of course, take on a life of their own. Sometimes they're just the product of, just imagination. But that's what I do is I am then realizing, okay, this is kind of what's going on. Let's meet these characters and try to, make them the most interesting people they can be to be involved in this process. So that's what I'm about. And then doing that with hopefully with the subtleties of the tension aspects that I described earlier. So that's what I did in this novel. I have my guy in prison. I surround him with people that some like him, some don't like him. There's threats here. There's security there. There's a relationship with the warden. There's even interaction that he has with a woman that works in the prison office. They're the people that he works with in his work crew. All these, I just put him in this whole prison world, which I am familiar with. I've been in prison to see prisoners. This is more of a work camp, a little bit of higher security work camp, but that's where he is. So that's kind of what I did with that. And with the lawyer, that's a little bit easier. I just put him in the law office, which obviously that's an environment I know quite well.
Well, just on that, I mean, you've said about the struggles that you sometimes feel with characterization, even though that you love it. And when you're writing novels that there are a similar theme, there are some similar angles to a lot of them in that there are like legal tangles. What are you doing to ensure that your characters are quite authentically and substantially different book to book?
Well, there are. That's an excellent question, and there are commonalities. Even though I've not written a bunch of long series books, there are commonalities just because of the nature of the legal profession. But you put them. One way you do that is you put them in different legal environments. Sometimes it's a small firm, which is totally different from a big firm. They might be in an international law firm. They might be in, I wrote some books for somebody, a character, a female attorney that was a Palestinian Israeli Arab, and she was working for a law firm in Atlanta, Georgia. So, that's obviously going to be different than the lawyer in the Guilty Until Innocent book who's in a small North Carolina town. So that helps avoid cookie cutter, scenarios. The other thing is, every single person is a unique individual. Every snowflake's different. Every zebra's different. Every person's different. If you and I weren't doing this podcast and we were in a car going somewhere on a trip, if we had a 3-hour trip, by the time we got there, I would know as much about you as you were willing to tell me. I'm just absolutely fascinated by people and their stories. And your story would be so different from anything that I've ever heard. And so it's certainly possible to populate novels with people that are different because that's just the way people are. Now, there will be similarities as well, but as long as you're willing to ask the questions, what, why, questions about the person, the character, the plot, then so far, I haven't had any complaints about there's a sameness to what you're producing.
I think my last question, you said that you start with a beginning and also an idea of the ending. But one of the things that even I know about characters is they will tend to do their own thing. How often do you find yourself having to wrestle your characters back to an ending that you had originally imagined?
Yeah, that is definitely an accurate representation. I respect what the characters are doing. I mean, I realize these are made up, but they have to become sufficiently real within my mind to live on the pages. And so if they go off in a direction, I will not summarily dismiss that. I will, like you said, wrestle with it and decide what's the best. In Guilty Until Innocent, I reserved judgment on some of the primary antagonist till quite deep, because I wanted the uncertainty that existed within my mind to be reflected on the page, so as not to give too many clues that would be okay, ho hum, I knew that was the case. So even though I kind of know the end, sometimes the exact mechanism I keep uncertain, if that makes sense, to so that I can communicate it in a way that is genuinely suspenseful.
And that is it for this week's Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Robert Whitlow for coming on the show. The new novel is Guilty Until Innocent. You can get a copy now. Use the link in the episode notes for our bookshop.org page. That way, a bit comes to me and the podcast, and you can also support your local independent bookshop by buying it over there too. Also, you can check out ways to support us on Patreon and Ko-Fi. Make sure that you subscribe to my Substack page. You're getting more or less a weekly newsletter. And this week, we're still talking about seasonal reads, and it just gives you a little insight behind the curtain into the world of the podcast. Now, I will see you next week with a brand new guest on the show. If you're celebrating, have a fantastic Easter. And until then, enjoy yourself. Thank you for listening.